Hi there, everyone. I'm Scott Barclay, Media Apprentice here at Acas. Welcome to today's LinkedIn live session. Quick apology for the slightly delayed start to the stream. We did have a few internet connection difficulties, but hopefully you've stuck around past the designated start time. And yeah, we're going to be speaking for about an hour or so, so feel free to dip in, dip out, and leave any questions that you have for our panel of experts in the comments. In our ever-evolving work environments, fostering an inclusive atmosphere for neurodivergent employees is more crucial than ever. Today, we'll be exploring the unique challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals and discussing strategies to create a supportive workplace for everyone. We're thrilled to have a fantastic lineup of speakers joining us. We have John Palmer, subject matter expert from Acas, Jennifer West, individual conciliator from Acas and chair of our Disability and You staff network. And we're also joined by our special guest, Professor Amanda Kirby from Do It Solutions. Unfortunately, Eve Anna Cole, who was advertised to appear on today's session, was unfortunately unable to join us at the moment. So hopefully we'll be able to get a session with her down the line. Thank you all to our panel for being here. You all bring a broad spectrum of knowledge and experience from across this area. It would be great if you could introduce yourself and your role. Shall we go with our special guest first, and then come to our Acas employee? So, Amanda, if you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today. So I come with a number of different hats. I'm a professor working in the field of neurodiversity for nearly 40 years, come from a neurodivergent family and recognise myself as being neurodivergent as well. I'm CEO of Do It Solutions, which is a tech for good company supporting people with training tools consultancy. And particularly at the moment, my role for the DWP is chairing an academic panel, and we've been put together to look at the formal evidence base on employment related to neurodiversity. So important to bring that evidence base together. So I'm really delighted to be here and discuss everything neurodiversity.
Fantastic, Amanda. Really glad that you could join us today. Jennifer, you want to give us a wee introduction?
Of course. Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer West. I have worked for Acas for around 5 years. I also wear multiple hats when it comes to neurodiversity. As Scott kindly introduced, I am the network chair of our internal Disability and You network. I'm also experienced with neurodivergence personally, both with recognising myself as neurodivergent and also having experience with friends and family of neurodivergence. And I also work to develop external products which give advice and guidance based on numerous employment law topics, most recently of which has been on neurodiversity.
Fantastic, Jennifer. Thank you. And John, yourself?
Thanks, Scott. I've been in Acas for about 20 years now. I've probably done most of the roles that people have heard of in that time. For the last few years, basically the job I've got is a fancy way of saying I work with our web teams to make sure that our external guidance is correct and useful. Work on a lot of areas around diversity, equality and inclusion, but most recently the neurodiversity guidance that's gone live just recently. I'm also a fair treatment contact for our Acas colleagues, and that means that people can come to me on a one-to-one basis and talk through any sort of concerns or issues they might have, which again gives me a nice amount of insight, as does the fact that I was a special needs governor for a good while, and I've been autistic my entire life, but actually been diagnosed as an adult just after lockdown.
Fantastic. So I'm glad that we have a panel of experts here, because I'm just a media apprentice. So you guys are going to be doing the main body of the chatting here, and I'm just here to direct the flow of questions. I do have a list of questions that I'm going to be following, but once more, if you are watching along on LinkedIn, we really, really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions for our panel today, do just leave them in the comments and I'll get to them, hopefully, fingers crossed. But to set the stage, I'd like to ask each of our panelists, what are some of the key challenges that employers might perceive as barriers to neuro inclusion? Shall we stick with the pattern that we set with the introductions, and we'll go to Amanda first?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting, and it's something I've been looking at recently. We're just about to launch the City and Guilds Neurodiversity Index for 2025, where we've looked at 1,000 employers, where they've looked at what are their barriers. And so this is really pertinent. So I think perception of time, that it's going to take a lot of time and cost, are still there and present, and other priorities. So one of the things is that we've got other priorities and pressures. It's going to take a lot of cost, which is not true. Most of adjustments are low cost, no cost, many of them, and awareness. So confidence and being able to have that conversation with somebody still remains a challenge for many employers. Getting it right, saying the wrong thing, and then because of that, being worried about saying the wrong thing, not having a conversation. And I think we'll come on to that later. So a perception of cost, a perception it's going to take a lot of time, worrying about other pressures in the work, and then how do I communicate effectively?
Fantastic, Amanda. Jennifer, you have any insight on that?
Absolutely. What Amanda said is absolutely correct. And I think when it comes to neurodivergence, there is a lot of misconception and a lot of fear around the topic itself. So from an employment point of view, an employer particularly, approaching the idea of speaking to someone with neurodivergence can feel a little bit intimidating, and it can feel almost like a bit of an unknown, the fear of the unknown in approaching the topic. It's kind of finding that balance of how you keep the person at the center of the conversation. That is going to be so key here, because keeping that person at the center, at the end of the day, they are the ones who know what's right for them. They know what's going to work for them. But then finding the balance in terms of how the organization themselves can provide things that are going to ultimately support that individual. There are so many benefits to doing that as well, in terms of when somebody feels supported, they're ultimately going to want to commit more to the organization. They're going to feel inspired by that organization. The organization then in turn are going to benefit from a better reputation, and there are ultimate benefits on both sides there. But in terms of the fears that come with that, as well as kind of not knowing the topic and not knowing how to approach the individual, there can also be, like Amanda said, the fear of the cost of implementing any adjustments that might come with what the individual expresses they may need. So, for example, there is a government scheme out there, the Access to Work scheme, which actually provides funding for reasonable adjustments, but many employers aren't aware of that existing. But moreover, a lot of these reasonable adjustments can be small, tiny changes that make the biggest difference. So it's about getting to know that individual, understanding what matters to them, and seeing as an employer what you can accommodate. And I guess it's about being flexible as well. A lot of the research that I've conducted in terms of my development of products has included reading research and literature. So the Birkbeck report from Birkbeck University London, in collaboration with Neuro Inclusion at Work, a charity, was fantastic in explaining some of the key steps, some of which Amanda's explained there, especially looking at kind of fears and what can be done to, overcome those fears. But one of the main recommendations from that report was that, there is a need to be a lot more proactive. So it's about employers, kind of getting to that point where they just have those regular check-ins, build the rapport with the individual, learn who they are, and be mindful of language. Let that employee lead, and let them tell you how they wish to be referred to, and how they refer to their neurodivergence as such, and really use that to try and sort of work out what is going to be the most beneficial approach.
Fantastic. That's some great insight there as well. Apologies if my camera seemed to cut out there for a moment or so. It will just pop in and pop out, but I am still here and I will still be asking the questions. John, did you have anything to add to what's been said already?
Well, I mean, I've been set up truly there because they were two incredibly wonderful answers. I think all I'd have to build on with that is just to say in very simple terms, I think for a lot of employers out there, it just feels like a lot. when they've not dealt with it before. And I think what many people out there will realise is that when you do start to look at this, actually it's not as complicated as you think, it's not as intimidating as you think, and actually you'll be able to identify with a lot of those things stuff, whether you are neurodiverse or not. So for example, if you're talking about someone that's got an issue with sensory overload in the workplace, well, we all like a quiet corner to be able to work in. There are lots of little things like that just come out and just make sense. And again, I think as Jen was saying, they generally do not cost a lot. If anything, they add to productivity. So yeah, just building on what they both said, there's that. I think the other point I would raise is that I think for a lot of employers, we're used to sort of thinking about rules and regulations and steps and processes and things like that. With neurodiversity, we sort of buck the trend here a little bit, because even in our guidance, and again, what everybody in sort of the area is saying, and the experts in the area are saying, is that do not wait for a diagnosis. Trust your employees when they're telling you they've got something. To be honest, a diagnosis is only going to take you so far, because everyone's neurodivergence is different, everyone's needs is different, and the diagnosis only tells you so much anyway. The real value you're going to get is trusting your employees when they say, you know what, this is me, this is what's going to make me more productive, can we work together?
Fantastic. Thank you all for those great answers there. And it's really provided some insight. I think the big takeaways there are just going to take a little bit of time and effort on the part of the employers. And just sticking with the employers for a moment, a common challenge we've sort of seen is a lack of awareness and understanding of neurodiversity in the workplace. What do you folks recommend that employers can do to increase awareness at work about neurodiversity? Jennifer, have you noticed anything in like common issues in your role as a conciliator?
I have, and I've also noticed a lot of sort of advice coming from my role as chair of the Disability New Network when it comes to this as well. In terms of what works for the individual, again, it's keeping a very person-centered approach. The way that I like to advise individuals that come to me for advice, whether it's in my capacity as the Disability New Chair or my role as a conciliator previously, or through the development of products, is that everything that you do as an employer should be person-centered and policy-driven. So the idea there is, when you're looking at ways in which you can raise awareness, think about what would that individual like to know about and how can you deliver that. Think about simple things like posters and signage. So if you're in an office environment, for example, put up posters about things that you might offer in terms of workplace networks, or, I know John's really skilled at this. He's a workplace contact that people can approach in the workplace should they have any particular worries or concerns, and have that safety of environment where they're able to have a confidential chat, but they're also having that, confidence that somebody is there to listen. And it's about kind of signposting to those resources, use what is available internally, capitalize on the opportunities of having such a diverse workforce by offering opportunities for those people to develop skills as workplace contacts and signpost to those things. There are, of course, also things that can be done, like being aware of campaigns and upcoming events that might be relevant to people who are neurodivergent. So, for example, the Neurodiversity Celebration Week that's up and coming, having individuals, whether it's in your marketing team or an HR professional, who's keeping a calendar and a log of up and coming events is also really helpful. Pop them in a calendar, keep them somewhere visible, and remind individuals of these things, whether it's through newsletters, whatever the platforms are that are the most effective for getting employee engagement. Within Acas, we use a platform called Viva Engage, which is Microsoft, and it's linked to Teams. And that's a really useful place to build networks. And there's a lot of ways in which you can get messages out on platforms like that. So it's very much just doing what you can to raise visibility, but also being resourceful in that. These things don't have to cost a lot of money. So
fantastic. Amanda, did you want to chime in here at all?
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer's done a amazing panoply of things. So just sort of adding to that a little bit, really, which is awareness comes from those conversations you have over coffee sometimes, and I think feeling safe in workplaces, so having champions in your workplace where there are other people they can go to and talk to and feel safe that they can share what do I need to do? Where do I need to go? In a big organization, sometimes having a mentor can be really useful, somebody who's had experience who isn't your manager, so you can have that honest conversation about where do I go? What do I find out? Because as Jennifer said, signposting, utilizing what you've got in-house, incredibly important, including your people. So where people feel safe, there's nothing that says a place is safe than when people are sharing if they feel it's appropriate to do so. And I think that's really important. We don't get people to stand up and tell their story if they don't feel that's safe and they're not. It's a voluntary action to say. And when you see that in an organization where senior leadership are coming forward and saying, these are my experiences, whether they are neurodivergent or they might have children who are neurodivergent, they've got experiences, then that sort of says to other people, right, it's okay for me to share this information. So I think the stories are very powerful case studies but having those conversations. So during the year where you've got like celebrating Neurodiversity Week, I've got Head On, we've got lots of events we're organising for that very busy week. It's an opportunity in-house to have some celebrations, and to sort of go, what's working? I often see the signposting isn't as obvious as it could be. When I'm talking to organisations, sometimes I go, well, do you have lots of acronyms? Do you have lots of, and they go, oh yeah, we got loads of acronyms. Do you know what they stand for? And they go, no, I don't know what they stand for. So just sometimes some very simple strategies can make an enormous difference, not only to someone who recognises or sees that they are neurodivergent, but for everybody it helps your new starters. And I think that's the one big thing, is that awareness in organizations isn't about autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, developmental language disorder, dyscalculia, Tourette syndrome and more, because all that does is people go, oh, I feel overwhelmed. It's much more about how do we have those good conversations, how do we have better conversations, how do we ensure that those adjustments are being put in place in a timely manner. And that should be an everyday practice. So the more it becomes business as usual, really helps to raise awareness and to reduce the stigma and reduce the fear that it's a big thing, it's going to cost a lot, it's going to take a lot of time. And like John said, rightly so, it's those simple strategies. It's about being human and keeping those conversations going. And I think we fear when we put a whole long medical list of conditions, people think they have to be experts in everything, and that stops the conversations happening.
Absolutely, that's 100% accurate there. John, did you have anything you wanted to chime in with on this?
Yeah, I think building on what Professor Kirby was just saying there, it is something that's very interesting that a lot of people, when they say, oh, let's find out a bit more about this area, they do start worrying about titles and terms and things like that. And of course, if you're interested in that, it is an interesting area. You can find all sorts of information about it. The NHS included has an awful lot of data there. However, what I'd say is I'm quite a fan of making use of things that are already available. And one of the things you can do if you're looking to sort of help raise awareness and start things going in your workplaces is actually look at the places that already have these materials ready for you. The Acas website itself, we've got a whole bunch of guidance with a whole bunch of links as well, where we point to things like this. But just to sort of, as we were developing this, we were working with amazing charities out there like the Brain Charity, National Autistic Society, the British Dyslexia Association. These all have pages dedicated that you can take their campaign materials. You can, Jen was mentioning about posters before, they have all these materials readily available for you that you just have to click and print. I would say after that, it's a matter of, as we sort of said before, making it human, because what can happen with a lot of things around equality and diversity is we can think, oh, it's National Inclusion Week, or it's Diversity Week, or it's Neurodiversity Week, or whatever it might be. Let's get all this stuff up. Let's have a session. Let's talk about it. And actually what happens with even the best willed people out there is sometimes that can become the week where everyone thinks about it, and the rest of the year it sort of drops off. And the best thing you can do for your neurodiverse employees, for your workplace, is to make sure that neurodiversity is something that's thought about all year round. Not intensely, not the first and foremost thing. It's doing whatever your job is that's the most important thing at the end of the day for a business, fair play. But actually, they're just low key in the background, just like anything else, making sure that it's being thought of all the way through and making it real. So you get those posters, you get that awareness going, but then you get those conversations continuing that say, like, let's talk about that. Let's not worry about what the technical definition of ADHD is. Let's talk about the fact that someone wants a little bit of help with time management, things like that.
Absolutely. It seems like consistency is a big thing here. Like you meant, like I think all three of you mentioned like awareness days and how important they are, but that it's also, it's out with that. It's all days of the year. It's important to focus on. We do actually have a few questions from the chat. We have a fair few people submitting their questions. So again, if you do have any questions, just drop them in the chat. If we don't get around to them all, that's totally fine. Just keep leaving them, and we'll get back to you in the future for sure. But yeah, let's go with this question. Somebody's asking, work experience is really important for young people, but it's quite often hard for employers to offer. And then you add in the fact that a young person is maybe neurodiverse, and this can make it even trickier. Is there any help or solutions to this? I don't know. I don't know if anybody wants to maybe just jump on in with that one.
I can jump in if you want to. I mean, I think the main thing is, what Jennifer alluded to before is information, right? The most successful work placement is when I know what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, where I'm going to do it, who I'm going to do it with, meeting those expectations. A lot of people, whether that's a work placement for a few weeks or it's a new job you're starting, we all get anxious when we're going into a new work setting. We may not know the rules. What should we do? When should we take a break? Can we eat our sandwiches at the desk? When should we go? Can we go to the loo? What do we do at lunchtime? What do people do? Can I go and help myself to the tea, or all of that? Or do I need to put the money in the kitty? And those things seem small, but actually they're enormously anxious making. So again, those small drips that add up and are cumulative are really important. So if you are an employer and you're going to be offering people work placements, this approach of a universal design, which is tell people what's going to happen, tell them when, tell them how, and then break down what's happening, the communication, like acronyms and where to go, really makes a difference to have those success. And it goes back to what John's saying, which is about having a conversation with somebody. Isn't about you've got ADHD, because two people with ADHD will have 25 to 40% of people with ADHD have dyslexia. 70% of people with autism spectrum condition or disorder, or those who are autistic, whichever their preferred framing, will have dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder. So as an employer, don't get hidebound in what is it so I know what to do. The best things to do is to find out what do you need to help support you. And the only way in a work placement is that person knowing what they're going to do. Because if you're going into a workplace setting, you haven't been there before. So I can't say I need this because I don't know what I'm going to be doing. And, if you're doing a work placement as a surgeon, or a work placement as working in a factory or a warehouse, you can't do it by label. You've got to do it by the individual, the task, and the environment. So, and those are conversations will just be successful you can have with everybody, not just those people, because it's going to make work placements more successful for all.
Absolutely. Jennifer, John, anything to add to that?
I was just going to jump in, actually, based on what Amanda was saying. I was thinking what I would really encourage, not only from the employer point of view, is actually the worker themselves to consider whether or not disclosing neurodivergence is going to benefit them and benefit the workplace as well. The more open and transparent we are, on both sides, whether it's the employee to the employer or vice versa, the better that the workplace relationships can be. So if people don't know about things, it's difficult for them to action those things to support. But if they are aware, then ultimately they can take steps to bring about some kind of adjustment or workplace, amendment. So I think it's just an opportunity for both parties to really consider who's going to lead the discussion, but creating the environment where that discussion is very much fostered and nurtured, given the opportunity for both employee and employer or person on work experience to have those conversations and to feel like they can approach it and ask for things just really, really openly and honestly. So that's just something to consider as well.
Can I just jump in there and leading with your strengths? So I think, when you're going in, often we go, this is a long list of things you need to do for me because I've got this. And it becomes a very negative framing, and learning to lead with your strengths. You want me in this workplace setting because I'm really good at these things. However, to enable me to do my best, I might need these areas of support. And it doesn't need to be a label conversation then. That's, again, a human conversation. This is me. This is what I can do. This is where my challenges might lie. Can we talk about it? Because sometimes disclosure can be pretty hairy, can't it, really? And not always go terribly well at the moment, everywhere.
Absolutely. John, anything you want to add?
So I think the actual sort of answer for the employers out there has been excellent already. So what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to focus on sort of talking with the potential person doing the work placement here. I think that as a neurodivergent person myself, when I think back to, I was lucky enough to have a work experience 2-week placement where I was basically shadowing a senior lecturer in an architecture school. And it was absolutely fascinating because I did struggle with some things, probably more than most people would have done. So the social interaction side of things, meeting other staff, that kind of thing, that was probably more of a challenge than I was expecting. Whereas actually what I did do for that lecturer was I made sure all of their lecture notes had been converted over into their new sort of presentation software that they had at the time, which they were absolutely astonished at and hadn't frankly expected anything like that to happen. So what I'd say is, if you're someone that's thinking about a work placement or going on a work experience or something, and you're neurodivergent, just remember, and again, Professor Kirby was touching on this before, you have a lot to offer. And it's focusing on the positives of neurodiversity as well. Your brain is wired differently, perhaps. That means you will do some things better. That means you might find some things more of a challenge. Everybody has that to some degree or other, and coming in and leading with your strengths is absolutely the thing that you do in a job interview anyway. So, do go forward with that. One final message I'd say to employers is work placements, work experience are really, really brilliant things to do. Not only will they help you sort of get to sort of meet people and perhaps understand about what your new workforce is going to look like, and certainly people, I would suggest in my experience, are more open about things like neurodivergence and disability and diversity these days than they have ever been. But you're going to potentially get people understanding you're the type of employer that's interested in that. You're going to get a better caliber and quality of people applying for your roles if you're doing that. If you are in the position to go out and talk to schools, talk to colleges, you can have those conversations, obviously, about if people coming into placements and how you can support them, but you can actually have that wider conversation, potentially even going talking to those colleges. Depends on what your employer's sort of position is there, and you can really sort of make a great connection that will benefit you in the long term anyway.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you very much for those answers. And yeah, we have questions on questions just coming in from our chat here, which is great. And this question I found definitely an interesting one. And I suppose it's from a perspective of maybe an employer or maybe an employee with a fellow employee potentially. How would you address the issue of someone who has never mentioned that they are neurodiverse? It's hard, obviously, to start a conversation if it hasn't been initiated by the individual. And I suppose maybe like add on, if you are an employer and you are thinking that something might be able to help one of your employees, but they haven't stated, they haven't been forthcoming at all, which is totally understandable and totally reasonable. But yeah, how would you potentially approach that? Obviously, quite difficult situation, but I don't know.
Take this one, Scott. Really
Absolutely.
happy to take this one.
Go for it.
So again, kind of coming from a place of personal experience, much like John, and thinking about what would work in a situation like that for me. I think the first thing to think about is, consider why that person isn't feeling comfortable to, maybe open up a conversation. It's a difficult one in terms of balancing, making sure that you're not making assumptions, but also being mindful and proactive in looking for things that may indicate neurodivergence. Now, this, as I say, can be a little bit of a tricky one in terms of, getting the balance right. But what is key for an employer is to consider, as they are trying to find out what is going to benefit that individual, it's really, again, thinking about just having that open communication from the outset. It's not leading with the idea of the person having neurodivergence or making that type of assumption, but it's thinking about approaching it in a very very empathetic language. So, thinking about that individual as an individual, and asking, are there any reasons for example, if you're noticing reduced performance or, patterns of lateness and things like that. These are hallmarks of neurodivergence traits, for example, of ADHD. Is there anything that we could do as an employer to support you? Is there any reason this is happening? And taking that sort of approach, but being mindful that there could be underlying reasons for that individual, obviously, not performing at their best ability, or, potentially being late and things like that. And I think it's also really important when you're considering neurodivergence to essentially know that it's not about, as we've kind of already touched on as a panel here, it's not about the diagnosis itself. Being mindful that not everybody who has neurodivergence knows they have neurodivergence. And even those who know they may have, because of the increased conversations that are happening on social media, your platforms like TikTok, these are getting people in conversation about symptoms and traits of neurodivergence a lot more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that individual recognizes themselves as having neurodivergence. And even if they do, they may be looking to get a diagnosis, but these things can take a long time. I know this from personal experience. So really, it's just a case of entering that with a really open mind, leading from a supportive approach more than anything else.
Can I just add in there one thing as well, just to add to that, is which I don't think it's the role of a manager to diagnose your employee. So even though you might have gone on a talk around autism or talk about ADHD and you come back and you go, oh, I think you could be autistic. Avoid that if you can, because you can be wrong, and you're not a diagnostician. And I think that's really important. I think Jennifer's point of have the conversation and look at where the performance issues are, target the problem, not put a label on the person, I think is, and I think that makes a big difference, because we can do it with the right intent, that I think they need to know, but actually it's not your role to start diagnosing everybody. And TikTok, I think, has, as rightly said, blown up, lots of interest, lots of people are talking about neurodiversity more than ever before. But for instance, ADHD, there are other reasons why somebody might not be able to focus and attend, apart from a tick list for ADHD. You might have had a head injury. You might be very anxious or very depressed. So there are other reasons why somebody might not focus and attend, and it's a bit more than a list to get a diagnosis. So we can make assumptions because that's what we've heard, that's what it must be, or look, they fill the list and they tick it all, but it is a bit more. So avoid being a diagnostician, be a manager. I think is probably important.
I think, Scott, just to build on that as well, and you're sort of respecting the confidentiality of the discussion is important too. I mean, we talk here, we're very fortunate on this conversation. We're all in office-based environments. We're probably in a situation where we can go and talk to our line manager without anyone raising their eyebrows particularly, or at least we can pick up a phone at some point and have a discretional call. Lots of people out there have neurodivergence and they're working behind a bar, they're stacking shelves in a supermarket, they're out farming in fields, whatever it is that they're doing as a job. Those environments, those atmospheres, they're always different and they always bring their own challenges. But one of the things that comes out of it sometimes is to find a quiet and confidential space and a time to talk to someone that doesn't inadvertently raise eyebrows and make everyone else start saying, well, what's going on? So again, if you're in that sort of situation as a manager where you think someone maybe is neurodivergent, and again, I can't stress enough, as Professor Kirby said already, you're not there to diagnose and to sort of out them anyway, but find a quiet space that doesn't seem like it's sort of out of the ordinary before you do start having those conversations. And again, when you have those conversations, just focus on, open questions, I think, work quite well, so you can, again, Jen was mentioning before, let's talk about this and this and specifics with work, but actually, is there anything else you want to tell me while we're here? We're in a good place, it's a good time to do it. That's the sort of thing where people can come forward. But again, touching on what Professor Kirby said, there are lots of reasons why someone perhaps isn't ready yet to fully disclose their neurodivergence outside of the diagnosis. For example, you will be in no position to know whether there is a stigma in their family or their home life around mental health and well-being and things like that, and people are just not ready. So it is one of those things to handle sensitively but not shy away. So it's an interesting balance to reach as an employer. I would say err on the side of caution, but don't shy away from having those talks.
Absolutely. It seems like boundaries are really just be aware of boundaries, employer boundaries, and yeah, just keep an eye on that.
Just
That's
really
fantastic.
quickly, Scott, actually, sorry, just to quickly chime in again. I think this links so nicely to what we discussed earlier about also ways in the workplace and having those, those platforms to speak about neurodivergence and having the points of contact. I think, having those sorts of things at work also encourage individuals to feel open in terms of approaching their employers. So it's just about keeping that and let the individual work it out for themselves as well.
Absolutely, give them the space and the time necessary, right? Kind of building off that question, actually. Reasonable adjustments, I think they've been touched on a little bit in the chat already, are often kind of an essential part of supporting neurodivergent employees. And then this question kind of relates a little bit. Do employees need a diagnosis to request reasonable adjustments? Is that a thing that's required at all, or no? Is that just a flat answer right
to
there?
watch the panel shaking their heads to get your answer back. As we were talking about before, a big part of this is trust. And what I would say to any employer out there is, you know what, you've gone through the efforts to recruit good people for your workplace. The idea that someone would want to come forward to you and sort of try and get some sort of advantage over you by disclosing a false neurodiversity condition or something like that, that is, I mean, I've not heard that. We've got a helpline that takes hundreds of thousands of calls in a year. I've not heard anybody suggesting we've ever had that kind of conversation ever. So, I would say for employers, put that trust in the people you've recruited in the first place to tell you the truth. Diagnosis can, in the long term, sometimes help with things. It certainly helped me as an adult understand things a little bit more, but it isn't a big deal, as it were, compared to some of the other things that you can already be doing. And as we've mentioned already here, a lot of the things you can do for someone in terms of reasonable adjustments for neurodiversity, not only do they cost very little or take very little effort, they're actually things that will generally benefit neurotypical people as well. So, it's kind of a win-win to put that trust there.
Just to, if you don't mind, just to build on that point as well, what John's touched on in terms of looking at the sort of reasons people get diagnosis, or don't, these things do take a lot of time. And, I think it's just something to be really mindful of in terms of it's not always an easy process. There's a lot of sort of things that come with that. And yeah, it's just something for people to bear in mind on that one as well.
Can I just come in with the reasonable bit as well, the reasonable bit in adjustments? Because I think that there isn't a standard set of adjustments by diagnosis. And I think that's really important just to emphasize that. You can't just get the shelf and go, this is what they are, you've got ADHD, off you go. And often there are some approaches that will help people who might come forward and say they've got areas of challenge. Of course, that's the case. But a test of reasonableness is often done when we go to a tribunal, which is the bit we don't want to end up doing. So having those conversations early and having the dialogue to look at what is reasonable in your work context, in the things you're doing, the place you're working, is really important, because you may not be able to do some things if you're a very small organization as opposed to a very big organization. But if we go back to the principle that John said, which is most things are, easy to implement, they don't cost a lot, they're about conversations, that's all reasonable for everybody, right? So then we go, the principle of reasonableness is have those conversations, don't put them off, and make sure that the things you're doing are things you do for everybody as standard. Then we really widen that, because then it means that if I'm not sure, I haven't got a diagnosis, it doesn't matter, I can start having those conversations. Diagnosis is a personal thing, and often we're driven by the pathways that exist for a diagnosis. There's a pathway for ADHD and autism, but there's often waiting lists for them. There are not pathways as easily for adults with developmental language disorder or developmental coordination disorder, which are more common, just want to put it out there, than ADHD and autism. Yet and they often overlap with ADHD and autism. So for some people, it's not so easy to go at all. And some people don't. Some people want a diagnosis and some people don't. So I think it goes back to that anticipatory approach, which is have a conversation that is reasonable for everybody.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
just a final point. I hope you don't mind, Scott.
No,
It's
go
just,
for it.
again, it just kind of cropped up in my mind there. But just as Amanda was saying about sort of the risks that come with it, you know, there is ultimately the employer has to be aware there can be risks associated with not providing reasonable adjustments. So if, for example, a neurodivergent person is classed as having a disability, which, by the way, they aren't always, but they can be, given the nature of the type of neurodivergence they have and looking at the legal definition of disability, it's important to be aware that, yes, there can be risks if reasonable adjustments are not implemented and offered should there be a disability. So having those things in place benefits employers because it reduces the risk of that cropping up later down the line if it came to fruition that individual did have a disability. But as John was saying earlier, it also puts things into place that allows that individual to work to their best ability, to have those barriers removed, and ultimately the employer is the one that's sourced that individual, recognises them for the talent. So why not utilise that for everybody's benefit, really?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that insight as well, folks. Very aware that we only have literally about 20 minutes left, and we do still have a fair few questions to get through. So yeah, we're looking for quick fire insights here with the final. I don't know. I think we're probably going to aim to try and get inside these 50 minutes, maybe another like 3 or 4 questions, ideally. So let's go with one from the chat that we still have to get through. Hold on, let me locate it. There was one on the role of here we are. What is the role of mental health first aiders in increasing understanding and support for neurodiversity? Does anybody have any insight on that?
Yep.
Go for it.
So we've got, I think, one basic, which seems a bit crazy, to highlight this, which is we've got one brain, right? And we often talk about mental health and we talk about neurodiversity. We've got the same brain. So we do know that individuals who are neurodivergent, there's a higher risk of having some mental illnesses, and having an impact. So we know that obsessional compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression are higher rates than in the general population. So the mental health first aiders have got an important role in, first of all, understanding that when we're talking about neurodiversity or neurodivergence, we're talking about people. And people might have combinations of strengths and challenges and impact on their well-being, and the workplace and home may have a factor on how they are, and also their past. We do see some individuals who've past might have had high rates of being bullied or feeling different, being isolated, or having challenges, which means they might have higher rates of things like rejection sensitivity, so higher rates of that. So I do think that mental health first aiders need to be appropriately trained. You're not an expert in everything, and I think this is an important thing always, is that sort of that the parameters of that, but just understanding we can't go brain A, brain B, it's one person. Absolutely. And home and work have an impact on that.
Absolutely. Did Jennifer, John, you?
I think Professor Kirby summed it up absolutely eloquently there anyway. I would just sort of stress the point that a mental health first aider might mean different things in different workplaces, but generally speaking, this is someone that will have a basic understanding of mental health and well-being issues, but predominantly they are there to sort of act as a channel to put you through to an appropriate area of support. So actually, even though they may not have a specialty, as it were, or a particular awareness of neurodiversity, as long as they are aware of how to channel people through to the right services, they're an absolutely valuable source of it. My experience is that generally people in those areas are quite passionate about this whole field, so they will have some understanding. But again, it's where they take you that's the main thing. So they're very useful source to get you in the right place. You might not know yourself what your organisation has to offer until you have those conversations.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
finally, I would just say that they are a point that creates safety of conversation as well. So it's a benefit for the employee and the organisation to have a mental health sort of representative. It helps the individual build their own skills as well, of course, you know, it's a developmental opportunity. But yeah, they're great in terms of being on the front line and being the first point of contact for a lot of people who may feel intimidated or nervous to approach more of a formal individual in the workplace.
That's fair enough. We've got two. I'll go. I think we'll manage to fit in at least two more questions. This one's a super interesting one that I definitely wanted to touch on, and it's about recruitment and onboarding. So new staff. What can employers do to this process to make it more supportive? And like a little bit of an addition here, is it unfair to provide things like interview questions earlier for some applicants? So that's a little bit of an interesting one. Amanda, you're shaking your head there.
I think the more we do the same thing for everybody, the more likely we're going to do it. So when we have to think sort of, who do I give questions to? Do I give them to you or don't? We're then discriminating in a way, because we're going, those who've asked for them get them. Those who might be anxious about asking for them but would benefit don't get them. And we could potentially be missing out on somebody who's got some great skills. So I think it goes back to sort of the workplace points that I was making before. Let people know what's going to happen at all stages of the recruitment process. Make sure that things like your job description have got terms and words that people understand, and don't have a whole long list of desirables that you just put in there because it's a good thing to have them in there, because people might not apply because don't fit. I can't tick all of them, so I'm not going to apply, and you might lose people who've got amazing skills that can be really good for the job. So get your job descriptions to marry with the job. I don't think generally we're very good at that. So I think it is quite hard to decide what are the core actual skills you need, you know, and challenge that. When it comes to the interviews, is to recognize that people don't always behave in the same way, and the way that you behave is that you might find that, you know, you'll shake a hand and look somebody in the eye, and all those are things that we see are sort of are normative biases in a sense, because that's what we expect somebody to focus, is to look at you. But actually, I know when I'm thinking really hard, I often look up, I look away, I close my eyes. I have a number of things that I'm fidgeting with the whole time. I am listening to you, you know, I am intently interested in what you're saying, but I do need some of these things to help me to stay on task and to focus. And where interview panels see that she's obviously disinterested, don't take her on because she's not interested in the job, you could lose that best hire. So information before, give everybody the questions. Why not, you know? Why not? If you know somebody, if you've given the questions and people haven't prepared, that tells you a lot about the person, doesn't it? You know, it shouldn't be a mystery, and avoid things like saying, you know, what would you do if you went to the moon? Because most of us are not going to be doing that. So just, you know, have questions which are relevant to the job, and assess skills that are relevant to the job as well. If you want a bricklayer to build a brick wall, see them building the wall, not describing the brick wall.
Absolutely. That's just me scoring off the next question about what you would do if we went to the moon. Jennifer, John, any insight on that one?
I'd just say, I mean, like I say, I've been in Acas 20 years now. I've recruited steadily through that time. I must have carried out hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews by now, and I've enjoyed doing them. One of the reasons I enjoy doing them, and again, maybe my autism has something to play with this, is that I like to get the best out of someone when they present themselves. And after all, that is what you're doing when you're carrying out a job interview. You want to give someone every chance they can to show you what they're like at their best. And as Amanda mentioned before, you know, what's the point of keeping the questions? Give them out to everybody. Is there some sort of top secret reason not to give them out? Are we got, you know, is the employer going to sort of are we going to get sort of shabby answers, rehearsed answers? What's the issue with that? If there is an issue, fine, but generally speaking, there's not going to be. Just focus your interview process on what you really need out of someone, and don't start making obstacles where there don't need to be obstacles.
Yeah, just to add to that, what I would say is, in terms of, certainly when it comes to interviews are hugely scary for a lot of us, let's be real. And I think when somebody's got neurodivergence, you know, the clearer and more communicative you are from the early stages up to that point, the better. So give opportunities for breaks, allow people to, tell you they need to pause when they're delivering an answer, allow them to bring notes in. As John says, what are you going to lose by doing that? Ultimately, even when people have prepared or rehearsed, when it comes to a live interview, you're on the spot. So people, the best of times, even those without neurodivergence, would have difficulties sometimes with interviews. So again, it's what I would say is I don't think it's unfair to provide interview questions in advance just for someone who's neurodivergent, if it's going to be a reasonable adjustment of kinds, because the risk is in not offering that. As Amanda said earlier, you could lose the risk of your best hire. You're not getting the best person for the role because you're not giving them the opportunity by not removing potential barriers. So, from a very early stage in advertising the role as well, it's, useful to ask, are there any adjustments you might require? What would these look like? And allow the person to speak for themselves in that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for those answers there. And I think we're going to slip on in one final question, if that is all right. We might go slightly past the 1 o'clock, but then we were a little bit late starting, I suppose. Do you have any references on how to incorporate employees' needs regarding neurodiversity into processes and procedures manuals? So this is a question from somebody in our chat as well. So any thoughts on that one? Don't know who you want to chime on in.
I'll get the ball rolling and I'll keep it short, Scott, because I know
Go for
where
it.
we are at time. It was interesting when we were developing the Acas guidance on this. It was something that we looked at, and it's very interesting because potentially different needs that come out of neurodivergence suggest that you might need different sort of areas of support. So, for example, if you have trouble with your reading, then perhaps having simple visual step-by-step illustrations for processes is a really, really advantageous thing to develop. If you are someone that is a details-oriented person and is going to get anxiety if you don't know the what-ifs, then what you might need is access to the manual, for want of a better term, so you can find all that information out. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Have the conversations with the staff that you've got at the moment, see what it is that they think would make those processes more understandable, more manageable, and then do that. Don't start inventing something you don't need as it stands in your workforce at the moment.
I think you have to think about the environment people are in, because different adjustments are going to be important in different environments, going back to what John said as well. And also just be aware of health and safety as well. So that might actually drive your conversation you're having, is to make sure that person is safe in the workplace. And if there's any training requirements that they might need, you might need to do task adaptation or task avoidance as well. So just having that, keeping that in the mind set as when you're trying to maintain compliance as well, and safety.
Yeah, I'm going to just build on that by saying again, all the way back to what I said in the early sort of stages of this panel, like people-centered, policy-driven. Ultimately, the person's going to know what they need in terms of adjustments. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. In terms of resources, absolutely would recommend the Acas webinars. They are free. That you can attend, have a look on our Acas website, and they're hour-long sessions excuse me, that provide so much valuable insight from a very basic level for those who aren't that experienced. If as an employer you feel you'd benefit from more in-depth training, or from more in-depth training rather, then do also consider the